And author Finuala Dowling has a well-documented love with words. Her numerous awards, including the InGrid Jonker Prize for flying in 2004, is a testament to that. Her first novel, What Poets Need, published in 2005, has shown a side that many would envy and creativity many authors would die for. Finuala Dowling joins us from our Cape Town studio. Finuala, thank you very much for joining us here on Morning Live.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sam.
There's just so many things that we can talk about, but I've got to talk to you about just the amount of awards you've won for the work you've put on words you put on paper. Where does this love for writing come from?
Well, I think it started right in my childhood. I mean, we had a house full of books, and in fact, when our house burnt down and the neighbors came and took all the furniture out, they left the books behind, and my mother complained. She said, "The Philistines, why did they leave the books?" So, you know, storytelling, books and words were so important to us as a family. My father was a radio broadcaster and a copywriter. My mother was an actress and a drama teacher, also a broadcaster. So words were just so important to us. And there were 8 of us children, all noisy, trying to get our parents' attention. And I was number 7, so you had to be sharp, you had to be witty, you had to have words.
So growing up in that world of creativity and finding fun and living your life through books, you then put pen to paper and you pen Flying, which then goes on to win the 2004 InGrid Jonker Award. What did that do for poetry and the love of poetry for you?
Well, that was just an amazing experience because, first of all, I had wanted to be a novelist, and I wrote, as many writers do, I wrote novels that were not published, that were rejected. And then my heart was broken, as one's heart is, and I started to write poetry, and I thought I was just writing for myself. And I think poetry taught me to write in my own voice, to be Finuala. And you know, I showed the poems to a publisher, editor friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, do you have any more of those?" And then those poems were in turn shown to Gus Ferguson, one of the few poetry publishers in South Africa, and he said, "If you can get me a full collection by August, I'll publish it." So it was a dream come true for a young writer. And I think what Flying taught me was that if you just write in your own voice, and I think poetry taught me this, just speak in your own voice, speak about the stuff that's really important to you, other people will love it. And I also realized there is an audience for poetry. And quite a lot of people contacted me, and it just gave me such confidence. I don't think, you know, a prize isn't important for the money you win or even for putting it on your CV. It's more for the self-confidence you get as a result.
But you know, when you talk about confidence, I think there's a lot of writers that are going to be resonating with this conversation, and they'll go, "Wow, you know, even award-winning authors sometimes have to deal with issues around confidence." But then you go and you pen what a lot of people have described as probably one of the most creative books they've ever read, in What Poets Need, and it's all about this unrequited love, the aspect of want. Where do you find these elements of creativity? Because I'm sure that there's somebody who has a relationship with somebody that they used to love, that they're still in contact with, but no longer have the access to that person's emotions or feelings.
Yeah, it's so fascinating you asked that, Sam, because I think when I wrote the book, I thought I was the only person who'd had this experience of longing and unrequited love and being in love with somebody who lives far away at a distance. And after I'd written the book, quite a lot of people contacted me. Somebody even pitched up on my doorstep. People wrote to me and said, "You've written my story." And that's an extraordinary thing. You know, when you're a writer and you're sitting alone in your study, you're writing something that you think is so personal that you worry that people will even be able to understand it. Will they even get where you're coming from? So to have people actually saying, "You wrote my story," that was so satisfying. And again, it strengthened my resolve just to write what was on my mind. You know, not to worry about the fact that, in fact, my novels don't have a hell of a lot of plot. You know, character is plot. Character is story. You just have to have a strong character.
I think at some point that some Hollywood producer has to approach you to turn that into a film, because I think the premise is amazing. But if you had to audit your own creativity level, where do you think Finuala operates on? What level? Because that's not the only interesting premise to something you've written. There's also poetry that you wrote after iFlying that talks about the dementia ward.
Yes. I think my creativity is constantly operational. You could call it a 10 in the sense that even now while I'm speaking to you on air, I'm also thinking about how would this be in a book? How would a TV interview be in a book or in a poem? And more particularly when I'm suffering or when there's anything that makes me unhappy or anything I don't understand, like my mother's dementia or my ex-husband dying of AIDS or whatever the story is that's on in my life, I'm dealing with it as a human being, but on another level, I'm also processing it as a poet and as a writer. I'm thinking about the words and I'm thinking about how to knit it up and make something quite, in my mind, beautiful about something that is actually quite ragged and sore and painful.
A little bit earlier you spoke about your parents. That's of course Eve and Paddy Dowling. Talk to me about that, because they were in radio, and everybody who's ever worked in the radio space knows that we use a phrase called theatre of the mind. How did that develop your ability to be able to see more than just words, to be able to write something and have the other person reading it kind of picture what you're trying to describe?
Well, I think what it taught me is that, first of all, the power of the speaking voice, the power of all the different tones that you can get. But most of all, the power of audience. I mean, what you're doing, Sam, now, what we're involved in right at this minute, is a matter of us speaking, but we're also aware of a wider audience out there. And I think if you want to be a good writer, you have to have that sense of people listening, and you have to want them to listen. I think it's all very well and good to experiment with your writing and try to, produce high art. But you also have to be constantly aware of, I am speaking to, I'm communicating with, I am reaching out to people out there who have not been able to put into words this particular experience of loss or depression or indeed happiness or hilarity.
Very quickly, I've got to wrap this conversation, but you wrote poetry in 2002, 2006, 2008. You wrote novels in 2005, 2007, 2011. Which is your first love? Or is that an unfair question?
Well, my first love is poetry because... Well, no, it's not an unfair question. Poetry is the favorite because that's the genesis. Novels, you have to worry about, is it going to sell? Poetry, it's not going to sell.
Finuala, thank you very much for joining us from our Cape Town studio. That's poet and author Finuala Dowling, who is well documented for loving words. She's sharing a story from us from our Cape Town studios. We're taking that break. We'll be back after this.